3 weeks passed after the secret vote, and life on Hearthlight Station continued the way it always had. The scientists ran their experiments. The engineers kept the systems running. The children went to the learning center every morning and came back every evening full of new facts about dying stars and alien biology, and the strange, wonderful ways that different species said hello to each other. Lily Hadley had started a new project in her sketchbook. She was drawing portraits of every alien species on the station, and she was doing it with a care and attention that surprised the adults around her. Her Torvasi subjects, with their long limbs and silver blue skin, were particularly difficult to get right. But she kept trying. Her father, Sam, would find her sitting cross-legged on the floor of the observation deck, her pencil moving slowly across the page, her eyes moving back and forth between her drawing and the alien crew members who passed by. Danny and Cole Marsh had reached picture number 217 in their ongoing project to draw something for every person aboard. Their latest gift was a drawing of a Halori engineer with what appeared to be a very large hat. The engineer did not wear hats. The twins did not care. The engineer kept the drawing pinned above his workstation and showed it to everyone who walked by. Greg Palmer spent most of his free time in the station's small gym, working through exercise routines that he had designed for himself. He was not particularly strong, but he was disciplined, and the alien crew members who used the gym alongside him often commented on his focus. He always nodded politely and went back to his routine. Nora Beckett had recently discovered that if she stood in the right spot on the observation deck at exactly the right time, the light from the dying star would turn the floor beneath her feet into a pool of soft orange and pink. She would stand there every evening, looking down at the colors, perfectly still, perfectly happy. None of them knew what was coming. The Nelvari stealth cruiser Pale Reach arrived in the Valen Expanse on a quiet afternoon. It was disguised as a standard supply vessel, carrying forged credentials and a cargo manifest that matched every expected delivery on the station's schedule. The station's docking officer, a young human named Pete Novak, reviewed the documents and found nothing unusual. He approved the docking request and went back to his coffee. Aboard the Pale Reach, Commander Velthari stood in the briefing room with her team of 12 operatives. She was a career officer, disciplined and experienced, with a record of successful missions across 6 star systems. She had never failed an assignment, but this mission sat wrong in her chest, like a stone she could not swallow. She had studied humans for years. She knew their history. She knew what they did when their children were taken. And she knew that High Arbiter Sorvan, for all his intelligence, had never actually faced a human in person. But orders were orders. She activated the signal jammers hidden in the Pale Reach's hull. Every outgoing communication from Hearthlight Station went dead. The crew would not notice immediately. The jammers were designed to mimic a natural signal disruption, the kind that happened regularly near dying stars. By the time anyone realized the blackout was deliberate, it would be too late. The operatives moved through the station in pairs, using maintenance corridors and service tunnels that they had mapped from stolen blueprints. They wore no insignia. They carried no weapons that could kill, only sedation devices designed to put a human child to sleep within 3 seconds of contact. Sorvan had been very clear about this. The children were not to be harmed. They were leverage, not targets. The first team reached the residential wing at exactly 14 minutes past the hour. Danny and Cole Marsh were in their room, building a tower out of colored blocks that their mother had brought from Earth. The operatives entered silently. 2 soft clicks. 2 small bodies slumped gently to the floor. The operatives caught them before they hit the ground, wrapped them in thermal blankets, and carried them out. The second team found Lily Hadley in her room, sitting on her bed with her sketchbook open. She looked up when the door opened. For a brief moment, her eyes met the eyes of the Nelvari operative standing in the doorway. She opened her mouth to speak. The sedation device clicked. She fell back against her pillow, her pencil still in her hand. Greg Palmer was in the gym. He heard a sound behind him and turned. He was fast for his age, and he managed to take 2 steps toward the door before the sedation hit him. He went down hard, and the operative who caught him noted with quiet respect that the boy's hands were still clenched into fists even as he lost consciousness. Nora Beckett was the last. She was on the observation deck, standing in her spot, watching the colors on the floor. She did not hear the operative's approach. She simply felt a gentle pressure on her arm, and then the world went soft and warm, and she folded to the ground like a flower closing for the night. The entire operation took less than 9 minutes. The 5 children were carried through the service tunnels to the Pale Reach. Commander Velthari confirmed the count, ordered the ship to undock, and engaged the stealth drive. The Pale Reach slipped away from Hearthlight Station like a shadow leaving a wall. Sam Hadley found Lily's room first. The door was open. The bed was empty. Her sketchbook was on the floor, open to an unfinished portrait of a Torvasi scientist with kind eyes. Her pencil had rolled under the bed. Sam stood in the doorway for a long time, not moving, not breathing, just looking at the empty bed and the open sketchbook and the pencil on the floor. Then he moved. He walked to the communication center and found Pete Novak trying to restore the outgoing signals. Karen Marsh arrived moments later, her face white, her hands shaking, her voice barely under control as she said the words that no parent should ever have to say. The twins are gone. Danny and Cole are gone. Within the hour, the families of Greg Palmer and Nora Beckett confirmed the same. 5 children, all human, all taken. Fennec, Sam's Torvasi colleague and friend, ran a scan of the station's sensor logs and found the signal jamming signature. His silver-blue face went pale. "Nelvari," he said quietly. "This is a Nelvari signature. I am certain of it." Sam looked at him. There was something in Sam's eyes that Dr. Fennec had never seen before. It was not anger, not exactly. It was something deeper and colder, something that seemed to reach down into a part of the human soul that most species preferred not to think about. Sam's voice was steady when he spoke, but it carried a weight that made the air in the room feel heavier. "Get me a line to Earth, any line, any frequency. I do not care how you do it. Just do it now." Pete Novak worked for 3 hours straight. He bypassed the jammed systems, rerouted a signal through a backup relay drone that had been left in a parking orbit 200,000 kilometers away, and sent a compressed burst transmission toward the nearest human communication hub. The message was short. It contained the location, the number of children taken, and the species responsible. Nothing else was needed. The message reached United Earth Command on Luna 4 hours later. It passed through 3 layers of security before landing on the desk of Admiral Grace Keller. She was 61 years old, with silver hair cut short, and a face that had been shaped by decades of hard decisions. She had commanded fleets, negotiated treaties, and buried friends. She read the message once, then read it again, then set it down on her desk and closed her eyes. When she opened them, she pressed the intercom on her desk. Her voice was calm and clear and carried no emotion at all. "Contact every ship commander in the 7th Fleet. All of them. No exceptions. I want every vessel powered up and in formation within 48 hours. And get me Claire Dunham on a secure line." She paused, and the officer on the other end of the intercom waited. "Also," Admiral Keller said, "send a message to the Galactic Council. 1 sentence. Tell them, we know what you did." On the fortress moon of Keth Voron, in a facility buried deep beneath the surface, 5 human children lay sleeping in a clean white room. They did not know where they were. They did not know why they had been taken. But somewhere far away, across a galaxy that was about to learn a very old lesson all over again, the people who loved them were already coming. High Arbiter Sorvan expected screaming. He expected desperate transmissions flooding every diplomatic channel. He expected human ambassadors pounding on doors and begging for their children back. He expected fear, panic, and the kind of emotional chaos that would make humanity easy to control. What he got was silence. Within 12 hours of the message reaching Earth, every human ambassador in the galaxy recalled to their ships. They did not argue. They did not explain. They simply packed their things, walked out of their offices, boarded their vessels, and left. On the Torvasi homeworld, the human ambassador, a woman named Beth Grady, who had served there for 9 years and was considered a close friend by many Torvasi leaders, stood up in the middle of a diplomatic dinner, apologized quietly, and walked out without touching her food. She was aboard her ship, and gone before dessert was served. On the HFY trade hub at Cavil Station, human merchants closed their shops, sealed their warehouses, and departed within hours. They left behind no notes, no forwarding addresses, and no explanations. The HFY merchants, who depended on human goods, stood in empty corridors and stared at locked doors that had been open for decades. Human communication relays across the galaxy went dark. These relays carried not just human transmissions, but also served as critical nodes in the wider galactic communication network, because human engineers had built some of the most reliable signal technology in known space. When the relays shut down, communication between dozens of species slowed to a crawl. Messages that used to take minutes now took hours. Some routes went completely silent. The border stations along human-controlled space sealed shut. The massive gates that allowed trade ships and diplomatic vessels to pass through human territory closed one by one, like the doors of a great house being locked from the inside. The last gate to close was Gateway 7, the busiest crossing point in the galaxy, through which nearly 15% of all interstellar trade passed every day. When it went dark, the economic impact was felt on 1,000 worlds within a week. And through it all, humanity said nothing. Not a word, not a whisper, not a single transmission on any frequency. The galaxy began to panic. Counselor Zetik, the Torvasi speaker of the Galactic Council, was the first to formally contact Sorvan. The old Torvasi's face was tight with worry when he appeared on screen. "What have you done?" he demanded. "The humans have gone silent, completely silent. Every channel, every relay, every station. This has not happened in 200 years. Sorvan leaned back in his chair and waved a hand dismissively. "They are posturing," he said. "This is theater. They want us to believe they are angry, so that when they come to negotiate, they will have the upper hand. It is a common tactic. We will wait. They will come to the table within a week, and when they do, we will present the concession accords, and they will sign." Zetik stared at him for a long moment. "I lived through the Solvari crisis," he said slowly. "I was young, but I remember. The humans went silent before that too, and when the silence ended, so did the Solvari." He paused. "You have doomed us, Sorvan. I hope you understand that." Sorvan ended the call. But as the days passed, even Sorvan began to feel the edges of doubt. He had expected the silence to last 2 or 3 days at most. Instead, it stretched into a week and then past a week, and the galaxy continued to unravel around it. Species that had relied on human trade for essential goods, medical supplies, energy cells, advanced computing components, found their stockpiles running low. 3 minor conflicts that had been kept in check by human mediators flared up again. The galactic economy, which had been deeply connected to human commerce for over a century, showed cracks that widened by the day. Sorvan told himself that this was still part of the bluff. He told himself that humans were emotional creatures who would eventually break and come begging. He told himself many things. None of them helped him sleep at night. On the fortress moon of Kethvoron, the 5 children had been awake for several days. They were held in a detention block deep underground, in a room that was clean and bright, but had no windows and no decorations. They were given food 3 times a day, water whenever they asked, and thin blankets that were not quite warm enough. Their guards were Nalvari soldiers, who stood outside the door and never spoke to them. Lily Hadley took charge almost immediately. She was 11, and she had her father's calm nature, and she understood without anyone telling her that the younger children needed someone to hold things together. She organized the sleeping arrangements so that Nora Beckett, who was afraid of the dark, could sleep between her and Greg Palmer. She divided the food evenly and made sure Danny and Cole ate before she did. She told stories at night, stories about Earth that she half remembered from books her father had read to her, stories about oceans and mountains and animals that the twins and Nora had never seen in person. Greg Palmer, at 14, was the oldest, but he was glad that Lily had taken the lead on keeping everyone calm, because his own skills lay elsewhere. He watched the guards. He memorized the pattern of their rotations, the sounds they made when they changed shifts, and the layout of the hallway that he could see through the small window in the door. He did not know if any of this information would be useful, but he gathered it anyway, because doing something felt better than doing nothing. Danny and Cole cried on the first night. They wanted their mother. Lily held them and let them cry and did not tell them to stop. By the second night, they had stopped crying and started drawing. They had no paper and no pencils, but Cole discovered that if he dipped his finger in the condensation that formed on the cold wall, he could draw shapes that lasted for a few minutes before fading. The twins spent hours drawing pictures on the wall that disappeared almost as soon as they were finished, and somehow this made them feel better. Nora Beckett was the quietest. She sat close to Lily at all times and held onto her arm. She did not complain. She simply asked, once a day, in a small and steady voice, "When is my mom coming?" And every day, Lily gave her the same answer, "Soon. She is coming soon." Far away, on the dark side of Luna, the human response was taking shape. Admiral Grace Keller stood at the center of a command room that stretched the length of a city block. Screens covered every wall, showing fleet positions, supply lines, intelligence reports, and communication intercepts. The 7th Fleet, the largest formation in the human navy, was assembling in deep space at a staging point that no alien species knew existed. 312 warships, 54 carrier groups, 16 heavy cruisers, and the flagship, the deep space dreadnought Resolute, a ship so large that it had its own gravity generators and could sustain a crew of 8,000 indefinitely. But the fleet was only part of the response. Claire Dunham arrived at Luna Command on the 3rd day. She was 53, with short brown hair and a face that gave away nothing. She had spent 26 years in the Office of Contingent Response, a division of the human military that most species did not know existed, and that humans themselves rarely talked about. The office had one purpose: to recover human civilians from hostile alien territory. Claire had personally led 9 recovery operations. She had never lost a single person she was sent to bring home. She sat down across from Admiral Keller and opened a file on her tablet. "We have confirmed the location," she said. "The children are on Keth Voron, in a subsurface facility on the northern hemisphere. The facility has a garrison of approximately 200 Nalvari soldiers and is protected by an orbital defense fleet of 120 ships from 5 council species." Admiral Keller nodded. "How long do you need? Give me the fleet as a distraction, and I can have the children out in under 30 minutes from the first breach." Keller studied her for a moment. "The Council will not surrender them voluntarily." "No," Claire agreed. "They will not." "Then we do this the other way." Claire nodded. She had expected nothing else. On Hearthlight Station, Sam Hadley had not slept in 6 days. He sat in the communication center with Pete Novak and Dr. Fennick, monitoring every signal they could pick up, waiting for news, waiting for anything. Karen Marsh came in every few hours, her face drawn and her hands steady, bringing food that no one ate and coffee that everyone drank. Dr. Fennick had been offered evacuation by the Torvasi government. He had refused. When Sam asked him why, the old scientist looked at him with his large silver eyes and said, "Because Lily once drew my portrait and told me I had kind eyes. I will not leave while she is out there." Sam said nothing. He put his hand on Dr. Fennick's arm and squeezed gently, and they sat together in the quiet room and waited for the silence to end. Across the galaxy, aboard the Resolute, Admiral Keller addressed her officers one final time before the fleet moved out. She stood on the bridge with her hands behind her back and her silver hair catching the cold light of the command screens. She spoke in a voice that carried no rage, no emotion, no heat at all. It was the voice of someone who had already made every decision that needed to be made and was now simply stating facts. We are not going to negotiate. We are not going to posture. We are going to bring those children home. And anyone who stands between us and them will learn why the rest of the galaxy wrote that law in the first place. 312 ships, arranged in perfect formation, cutting through the dark of space like a blade through still water. They made no announcements. They sent no warnings. They simply came. And the galaxy, watching from a distance, held its breath. The Seventh Fleet dropped out of faster-than-light travel at the edge of the Keth-Voron system and did not slow down. There was no pause. There was no moment of hesitation where the human ships stopped to assess the situation or send a polite greeting. They arrived, they formed up, and they moved forward. 312 warships, advancing in a formation so tight and so perfectly coordinated that it looked less like a fleet and more like a single living thing. The Council Defense Fleet was waiting, 120 ships from 5 species, arranged in a defensive wall around the fortress moon. They had been on alert for 3 days, ever since long-range sensors had first detected the approaching human fleet. Their commanders had spent those 3 days running battle simulations, adjusting formations, and sending increasingly urgent messages to the Galactic Council, asking for reinforcements. No reinforcements came. The Defense Fleet's lead commander, an experienced Nelvari admiral named Rothon, opened a broadcast on every standard channel. "Human Fleet, you have entered restricted space under the authority of the Galactic Council. You are ordered to halt your advance and state your intentions. Failure to comply will be treated as an act of aggression." The Resolute did not respond. Rothon repeated the message. He repeated it 3 more times over the next 20 minutes, each time with increasing urgency. The human fleet did not acknowledge a single transmission. They kept coming, spreading slowly outward into a wide arc that the alien commanders recognized with a growing sense of dread. It was an envelopment pattern, designed to surround an enemy force and cut off every route of escape. On the surface of Keth-Voron, High Arbiter Sorvan stood in the command center of the underground facility and watched the tactical display with eyes that were finally beginning to show fear. The human fleet outnumbered his defense force nearly 3-1, and the ships themselves were bigger, heavier, and more heavily armed than anything the Council had assembled. He had been so confident that humanity would never risk military action while their children were in his custody. He had been so certain that the threat of harm to the children would keep the humans at the negotiating table. He had not considered the possibility that the humans were not coming to negotiate at all. Sorvan opened a priority channel to the full Galactic Council. "I am requesting immediate military support," he said, and for the first time, his voice was not calm. "The human 7th Fleet is approaching Keth-Voron in attack formation. We need reinforcements, now." Councillor Jetik answered first. The old Torvasi looked at Sorvan through the screen with an expression that held no sympathy and no surprise. You took their children, Sorvan, he said. The Torvasi will not send a single ship to die for your arrogance. You will face this alone. The HFY Collective sent a written statement that arrived moments later. It read, "We warned every young species for 10,000 years. You did not listen. The HFY Collective will not intervene." The Halori Republic did not even respond. They simply disconnected from the channel. One by one, the council species that had not been part of Sorvan's conspiracy stepped back and let the silence speak for itself. They were not going to stand between humanity and its children. Admiral Rothon, commanding the defense fleet, understood what this meant. He was a soldier, not a fool, and he could read a tactical display as well as anyone. He opened a private channel to his captains. "We will hold our positions," he said. "But I want every crew member to know that evacuation pods are to be launched the moment a ship takes critical damage. We are not going to die here for a decision that was not ours to make." The battle began at 1400 hours, Galactic Standard Time. The human fleet did not fire first. Instead, the Resolute and its escorts advanced directly into the center of the defense formation, closing distance at a speed that forced the alien ships to either fire or move. 3 council ships fired warning shots across the bow of the Resolute. The Resolute ignored them. When the distance closed to weapons range, Admiral Keller gave a single order: disable their fleet. Minimize casualties. I want survivors. The reason she wanted survivors was not mercy. It was memory. She wanted every crew member on every alien ship to live long enough to go home and tell their people what they had seen. The human fleet opened fire with a precision that bordered on surgical. They targeted engines first, then weapon systems, then communication arrays. Ship after ship in the defense fleet went dark, drifting powerlessly as their systems failed one by one. The alien crews scrambled for damage control, but the human weapons were too fast and too accurate. The battle felt less like a fight between equals, and more like watching a master craftsman disassemble a machine. Each strike purposeful, each shot placed exactly where it needed to be. Their weapons struck the human ships and did damage, real damage, scoring hull plates, knocking out secondary systems, even crippling 2 smaller human frigates. But for every hit they landed, the human fleet returned 10, and within 40 minutes, the defense formation had collapsed. Admiral Rothon ordered the evacuation of his remaining functional ships. He was the last to leave his own bridge, and as he walked to the escape pod, he paused and looked back at the tactical display one final time. The human fleet had surrounded HFY completely. There was not a single gap in their formation. The battle, if it deserved that name, was over in less than 2 hours. While the fleet dismantled the orbital defenses, Claire Dunham was already on the move. 3 stealth shuttles, each carrying a team of 12 special operatives from the Office of Contingent Response, slipped through the chaos of the battle and descended to the surface of HFY. They landed at 3 separate points around the underground facility, breaching the surface entrances simultaneously. The Nelvari guards inside the facility were well trained, but they were not prepared for what came through their doors. Claire's teams moved with a speed and coordination that left no room for organized resistance. They cleared corridors in seconds. They disabled security systems before the facility's computers could even register the intrusion. They did not kill unless they had no choice, but they did not hesitate either. Every movement was efficient, practiced, and absolutely relentless. Commander Velthari was in the facility's security office when the breach alarms went off. She watched on the monitors as the human operatives moved through the corridors, and she understood immediately that resistance was pointless. These were not regular soldiers. These were something else entirely. She had studied humans long enough to know that their species produced, in rare and frightening cases, individuals who were built for exactly this kind of work. People who could move through danger the way water moves through cracks in stone, finding every weakness, exploiting every gap, never stopping, never slowing down. Velthari activated the facility's intercom. "All personnel, stand down," she ordered. "Do not engage the humans. I repeat, do not engage." Some of her soldiers obeyed. A few did not, and those few were subdued so quickly that they barely had time to raise their weapons. Velthari walked to the entrance of the detention block and stood there with her hands at her sides. When Claire Dunham turned the corner and approached, flanked by 4 operatives, Velthari reached down, removed her sidearm from its holster, and held it out. Claire took it, without a word. "The children are through this door," Velthari said. "They are unharmed." Claire studied the Nelvari commander's face for a brief moment, then nodded and pushed the door open. The room was bright and bare. 5 children looked up from where they sat on the floor. Nora Beckett was holding on to Lily Hadley's arm. Danny and Cole Marsh were sitting close together, shoulder to shoulder. Greg Palmer was on his feet, his fists clenched, his jaw tight, ready to fight whoever came through that door, even though he was 14 years old and had no weapon, and no training, and no chance at all. He was going to fight anyway, because he was human, and that was what humans did. Claire Dunham knelt down so that she was at eye level with the children. She had done this 9 times before, in 9 different facilities, on 9 different worlds. It never got easier, but her voice was warm and steady when she spoke. "My name is Claire. I am here to take you home." The 11-year-old girl who had kept the younger children fed, who had told them stories every night, who had held Nora when she was scared, and Danny and Cole when they cried, looked at the woman kneeling in front of her, and simply nodded. "We knew someone would come," she said. Aboard the Resolute, Sam Hadley and Karen Marsh were waiting in the ship's medical bay. They had been brought aboard before the operation began, at Admiral Keller's personal order, because the Admiral had decided that the first faces these children would see after their rescue would be the faces of their parents. When the shuttle docked and the doors opened, Sam Hadley saw Lily walking toward him, and every wall he had built inside himself over the past 2 weeks, every layer of calm and control and discipline, came down at once. He crossed the distance between them in 3 steps, and wrapped his arms around his daughter and held her so tightly that she could hear his heart beating through his chest. He did not speak. He could not speak. He just held her. Karen Marsh dropped to her knees as Danny and Cole ran to her. She pulled them both against her and made a sound that was not a word, not a cry, not anything that had a name. It was the sound of a mother getting her children back, and everyone on the bridge who heard it through the open intercom would carry it with them for the rest of their lives. Nora Beckett was carried off the shuttle by one of Claire's operatives, a large man named Jake Henley who had a daughter the same age at home. Nora had fallen asleep during the shuttle ride, her head on his shoulder, her small hand gripping the collar of his uniform. Jake Henley had conducted over 40 combat operations in his career and had never once lost his composure. He was crying when he stepped off the shuttle, and he did not care who saw it. Greg Palmer walked off on his own. He stopped in front of Admiral Keller, who was waiting at the edge of the bay. He stood straight, looked her in the eye, and said, "I watched their guard rotations and memorized the facility layout. I can give you a full report if you want." Keller looked at the 14-year-old boy standing at attention in front of her, and, for the first time in the entire operation, she smiled. "I would like that very much," she said. "But first, go eat something. That is an order." Greg nodded, and only then did his shoulders finally relax. 1 hour later, Admiral Keller opened a broadcast on every frequency available, a transmission so powerful that every species in the galaxy could hear it. Her voice was calm, measured, and carried the weight of 300 warships and a civilization that had just proven, once again, exactly what it was capable of. The children are safe. Now we will discuss what happens to those responsible. You have 24 hours to surrender every individual who authorized this operation. If you do not, we will come and collect them ourselves. This is not a negotiation. The transmission ended. The galaxy listened. And on the surface of HFY, in the ruins of a command center that had been built to hold human children hostage, High Arbiter Sorvan sat alone in the dark, and finally understood what he had done. The 24 hours came and went, and the Galactic Council did not hold together. It cracked like old stone under heavy weight, splitting along the lines that had always been there, but that no one had wanted to look at too closely. The species that had not been part of Sorvan's conspiracy fell over each other in their rush to separate themselves from those who had. Public statements were issued within hours. The Torvasi government released a full condemnation of the operation and opened their intelligence files to human investigators. The Udresi Collective did the same. The Halori Republic went even further, formally expelling the Nelvari ambassador from their homeworld, and freezing all Nelvari assets in Halori space. The 4 council members who had voted with Sorvan tried different strategies. 2 of them surrendered immediately, hoping that cooperation would earn them lighter treatment. A third attempted to negotiate through intermediaries, offering to resign from the council in exchange for immunity. Claire Dunham's response to this offer was brief. That is not how this works. The 4th conspirator, a Drenai trade minister named Kozval, barricaded himself inside his private estate on a fortified moon and declared that he would not submit to human justice. A team of human operatives arrived at his estate 8 hours later. They did not force entry. They simply parked their ship in orbit, cut all power and communication to the estate, and waited. Kozval lasted 2 days without light or heat before he walked out on his own and surrendered. High Arbiter Sorvan ran. He had planned his escape carefully, or so he believed. He had a private ship hidden in a docking bay that was not on any official record. He had forged identity documents from 3 different species. He had a route map through the outer territories into the lawless fringe systems beyond council jurisdiction, where governments were weak and questions were not asked. He boarded his ship, powered up the engines, and launched from HFY's surface just as the human fleet was finishing its cleanup of the orbital debris. He made it 6 hours into his escape before Claire Dunham's people intercepted him. Sorvan never found out how they knew his route. He never found out how they had identified his ship. He never found out that a junior analyst in Claire's office, a 24-year-old woman named Amy Tate, had predicted his exact escape plan 3 days before the fleet even arrived at HFY. Simply by studying his personality profile and cross-referencing it with the shipping records of every private docking bay in the system. Amy Tate received a commendation for her work. She put it in a drawer and went back to her desk. Sorvan was brought back in restraints. He did not struggle. The look on his face was not anger or defiance. It was the blank, hollow expression of someone who had finally realized that the story he had told himself about the galaxy, about humanity, about power and control, and the way things worked, had been completely and totally wrong. The tribunal was held on Aravine Point, a neutral space station that had been used for major galactic legal proceedings for over 5,000 years. The station was enormous, with courtrooms that could seat representatives from dozens of species, and on the day the tribunal opened, every seat was filled. 32 species sent official delegations. Hundreds more watched through broadcast feeds that reached every corner of inhabited space. It was the most widely observed legal proceeding in galactic history. The 5 conspirators sat in a row at the front of the chamber. Sorvan was in the center. He had been given the opportunity to arrange for legal representation, and he had chosen to represent himself, which surprised no one who knew him. Even now, even after everything, he believed he was the smartest person in the room. The charges were read: unlawful abduction of minors, conspiracy against a sovereign species, violation of the Interstellar Convention on Civilian Protection, and abuse of council authority. The evidence was overwhelming. Communication records, operational logs, financial transfers, and testimony from dozens of individuals who had been involved at various levels of the operation. The case against the conspirators was so thorough that even the most sympathetic observers in the gallery could find no room for doubt. Commander Velthari was called as a witness. She walked to the stand with the straight-backed posture of a career soldier and answered every question with the same quiet, factual precision that had defined her entire career. She described the planning meetings she had attended, the orders she had received, the operational details of the abduction, and the moment she had chosen to surrender rather than resist the human rescue team. She did not attempt to excuse her own involvement. She stated simply that she had followed orders, that she had ensured the children were not physically harmed, and that she accepted whatever consequences came her way. When asked if she had believed the operation was wise, she paused for a long time before answering. "No," she said, "I did not. But I carried it out because I was ordered to, and I will live with that for the rest of my life." The children were not required to testify. Humanity had made this a condition of the tribunal. Instead, written statements from each child were read into the record by a neutral official. Danny Marsh's statement said that he missed his mom and that the food was not very good, and that his brother Cole had been brave the whole time. Cole Marsh's statement said that Danny had been braver. Greg Palmer's statement was detailed and precise. He listed the guard rotation schedule he had memorized, the layout of the facility as far as he had been able to observe it, and a description of every Nelvari soldier he had seen. He ended by writing, "I want to join the fleet when I am old enough." Nora Beckett's statement was one sentence long. "I want to go home, please." Lily Hadley's statement was the last to be read, and it was the one that silenced the chamber. She described how she had organized the sleeping arrangements to keep Nora warm. She described how she had divided the food and told stories at night to keep the younger children from being too scared. She described Danny and Cole drawing pictures on the wall with condensation that disappeared after a few minutes. And she wrote, at the end, "I was not scared for myself. I was scared for Nora, because she is only 6, and she kept asking when her mom was coming. I told her every day that her mom was coming soon. I am glad I was not lying." The chamber was silent for a very long time after that. Sorvon attempted a defense. He argued that humanity's unchecked expansion posed a genuine threat to galactic stability. He argued that the concession accords were reasonable and necessary. He argued that the children were never harmed and were always intended to be returned safely once the accords were signed. He spoke for nearly an hour, and his words were organized and logical, and completely beside the point. The tribunal deliberated for less than a day. The verdict was unanimous. All 5 conspirators were stripped of their titles, their ranks, their political standing, and their species affiliation. They were sentenced to permanent exile on Verith Null, a barren and uninhabited world at the far edge of known space, with no communication access and no possibility of return. Their names were entered into the Galactic Record of Dishonor, a registry that had not been used in over 1,000 years. Commander Velthari received a separate, lighter sentence of 10 years of restricted service, in recognition of her cooperation and her decision to surrender. But humanity was not finished. 2 weeks after the tribunal, the government of United Earth presented a document to the Galactic Council. It was not a request. It was not a proposal. It was not something that was open for discussion or amendment or negotiation. It was called the Hearthlight Compact, and it contained a single article. The article read, Any act of aggression, detention, coercion, or harm directed against a human child by any species, government, organization, or individual will be considered an act of war against the entirety of humanity, to be met with the full and unrestricted response of the United Earth military. There will be no negotiation. There will be no appeal. There will be no second chance. The compact was presented to each council species individually. Each was given the opportunity to ratify it. Every single one did, most within hours. Not because they agreed with its severity, not because they thought it was fair, but because every single one of them had just watched humanity dismantle a defense fleet of 120 ships, breach an underground fortress, and recover 5 children in less than a day. And not a single one of them wanted to find out what would happen if the humans ever had to do it again. Months passed. The galaxy slowly returned to something like normal. Trade routes reopened. Communication relays came back online. Human ambassadors returned to their posts, and the delicate web of interspecies diplomacy began to repair itself. Changed, but not broken. On Hearthlight Station, the repairs were finished and the research programs resumed. Sam Hadley went back to his work on stellar decay models, but he had moved a second chair into his lab, a small one, just the right size for an 11-year-old girl. Lily sat there most afternoons, reading or drawing, her sketchbook open on her lap. She had finished her portrait of Dr. Fennick. She had given him kind eyes, just as she had promised. Karen Marsh ran the medical bay, with the twins constantly nearby. Danny and Cole had resumed their drawing project, and they were now up to picture number 304. Their latest gift was for Commander Velthari, who they had never met, but whose name they had heard. A drawing of a tall alien with sad eyes, standing under a yellow sun. Karen did not know what to do with it. She kept it in her desk drawer. Greg Palmer had enrolled in a pre-military engineering program through the station's educational network. He studied every evening, and on weekends he helped Pete Novak with maintenance on the communication systems. Pete had started teaching him how to reroute signals through backup relays. "You never know when you might need it," Pete said, and Greg nodded seriously. Nora Beckett had drawn a new picture. It hung on the wall of the station's learning center, in a frame that Dr. Fennick had made for it. The picture showed a woman kneeling down, with brown hair and a kind face, and behind her, a doorway full of light. Underneath, in careful crayon letters, Nora had written, "Claire came to get us." Claire Dunham saw the picture once, during a brief visit to the station, to close out the operational file. She stood in front of it for a long time, not speaking. Then she took a photograph of it with her personal device, nodded to Dr. Fennick, and left without saying a word. The photograph became the only personal item on her desk at the Office of Contingent Response. It stayed there for the rest of her career. Across the galaxy, the story spread. It was told in trading posts and military academies, in diplomatic halls, and in the quiet rooms where parents put their children to bed. The details changed with each telling, as stories always do. The number of ships grew larger. The rescue became faster. But the heart of the story never changed, because the heart of the story was true. Young alien children on 100 different worlds asked their parents the same question: why must we never hurt the human children? And every parent, regardless of species, regardless of world, regardless of how many stars separated them from Earth, gave the same answer: because if you do, nothing in this galaxy will save you from what comes next. The unwritten law was no longer unwritten. It was carved into the foundation of galactic civilization, etched into treaties, and spoken in warnings, and remembered in stories that would be told for as long as the stars still burned. And it would never be broken again. The galaxy had many laws. Some were written in old books that no one read anymore. Some were carved into the walls of ancient temples on worlds that had gone dark a long time ago. Some were kept in the digital records of the Galactic Council, stored in machines that hummed quietly in towers of glass and metal. But the most important law in the galaxy was not written down anywhere. It did not exist in any book, any temple, or any machine. It lived in the voices of elders who whispered it to their young, in the nervous glances of diplomats who changed the subject whenever it came up, and in the memories of entire civilizations that had learned the hard way what happened when it was broken. The law was simple: do not attack the human children. Nobody remembered exactly when this law first came into existence. Humanity had only been part of the galactic community for about 200 years, which was a very short time compared to species that had been traveling between the stars for tens of thousands of years. When humans first left their home planet and reached the wider galaxy, most species did not take them seriously. They were small, soft, short-lived, and fragile. Their technology was crude. Their ships were slow. Their bodies broke easily in the cold vacuum of space. The older species looked at them the way a grown animal looks at a newborn stumbling across the ground for the first time. That was a mistake. The Dralith hegemony was the first to learn. They were a proud and ancient empire, rulers of over 300 star systems, and they decided that humanity's expansion into unclaimed territory was an insult to their borders. They launched a quick military strike against a small human colony on the edge of their space. The colony had fewer than 10,000 people. The Dralith expected the humans to retreat, apologize, and accept their place at the bottom of the galactic order. Instead, humanity declared total war. Within 18 months, the Dralith hegemony lost its entire military fleet, its shipyards, its fuel reserves, and its seat on the Galactic Council. The humans did not stop when the Dralith surrendered. They kept going until the hegemony was broken into 12 smaller states, none of which would ever pose a threat to anyone again. The galaxy watched in stunned silence. No one had expected this. The small, soft, short-lived species had torn apart one of the oldest empires in known space, and they had done it with a fury that no one could explain. But the galaxy could have lived with that. Wars happened. Empires rose and fell. What truly terrified every species was what happened 30 years later with the Salvari Dominion. The Salvari had not attacked a human colony. They had attacked a human transport ship, a civilian vessel carrying families to a new settlement. There were children on that ship, 47 children, ranging in age from infants to teenagers. The Salvari boarded the ship, took the adults as prisoners, and placed the children in a detention camp on one of their outer worlds. They intended to use the children as bargaining chips to force humanity into a trade agreement. The children were held for 11 days. On the 12th day, the human military arrived. What followed was not a war. It was an erasure. The Salvari Dominion ceased to exist. Not just its government or its military, but its entire infrastructure, its trade networks, its cultural institutions, its presence on every galactic body and organization. Humanity did not simply defeat the Salvari. They removed them from the galactic stage so completely that within a generation, young species had to look up who the Salvari even were. After that, the unwritten law took hold. Elder species passed it to younger ones. Diplomats included it in unofficial briefings. Military commanders drilled it into their officers. You could trade with the humans. You could argue with them. You could even fight them if you were foolish enough. But you did not touch their children, ever. And for a very long time, no one did. The deep space research station called Hearthlight floated in a slow orbit around a dying star in the Valen expanse. It was a joint project, built and operated by humans and 3 alien species working together to study the final stages of stellar collapse. The station was large, clean, and comfortable, with wide corridors and big windows that looked out at the red and gold light of the fading star. About 400 people lived aboard, a mix of scientists, engineers, medical staff, and their families. Among them was Sam Hadley, a quiet man in his early 40s who had spent most of his adult life in the military before switching to civilian research. He had gentle hands and tired eyes, and he was raising his 11-year-old daughter, Lily, on his own. Lily was bright and curious, the kind of child who asked questions that made adults stop and think. She had her father's calm nature and a talent for drawing that filled her sketchbook with pictures of stars and alien plants and the faces of people she liked. There was also Karen Marsh, a field medic who ran the station's medical bay with quiet efficiency. She was a single mother to 8-year-old twins, Danny and Cole, two boys who had more energy than the station's power grid and who had made it their personal mission to draw a picture for every single crew member aboard, human and alien alike. The aliens found this both confusing and deeply charming. Two other human families also had children on the station. Greg Palmer was 14, tall for his age, and serious in the way that boys sometimes become when they feel responsible for the people around them. Nora Beckett was 6, the youngest human on the station, a small girl with big eyes who was afraid of the dark, but brave about almost everything else. Life on Hearthlight was peaceful. The humans and aliens worked side by side, shared meals, celebrated each other's holidays, and watched the dying star paint the sky in colors that no artist could ever fully capture. It was, by all accounts, exactly the kind of place where the galaxy's many species could exist together in something close to harmony. Far away, on the capital world of the Nelvari, a tall and sharp-featured alien named High Arbiter Sorvon sat in a room with 4 other powerful figures from 4 other species. The room was dark. The conversation was quiet. And the topic was humanity. Sorvon had spent decades studying humans. He did not admire them the way some species did. He feared them, and he hated that he feared them. And he had decided that the rest of the galaxy's fear was a disease that needed to be cured. The unwritten law, he believed, was not wisdom, it was cowardice. Humanity had built a myth around itself, a story of unstoppable rage, and the galaxy had been foolish enough to believe it. He proposed a plan. It was clean and precise. They would take a small number of human children from a remote station, somewhere far from Earth, somewhere that would take time for the human military to reach. They would hold the children safely and use them as leverage to force humanity into signing the concession accords, a set of treaties that would permanently limit human expansion, military strength, and political influence. Humans loved their children more than anything. They would not risk them. They would sign. The 4 others in the room hesitated. They had all heard the stories. They had all grown up with the warnings. But Sorvon was persuasive, and his arguments were logical, and his confidence was absolute. One by one, they agreed. The vote was taken in silence. No record was made. No document was signed. And somewhere in the Valen expanse, aboard a station orbiting a dying star, 5 human children slept peacefully in their beds, unaware that the most dangerous decision in galactic history had just been made about them.